If an avoidant ever comes back broken and begging, you need to hear this first. Begging is not the same as change. Begging is emotion in a moment. Change is character over time. Begging is what someone does when they feel the fear of losing access. Change is what someone does when they're willing to become emotionally responsible, even after the fear passes. And if you don't separate those two, you will mistake intensity for transformation. You will confuse desperation with devotion, and you will reopen your heart to the same pattern wearing a softer face. When an avoidant returns broken, it can feel like the universe finally corrected the story. Like justice, like proof that your love mattered. Like the moment you've been secretly waiting for, the moment they finally see you, finally value you, finally realize what they threw away. And I understand why it hits you so hard, because being discarded by an avoidant doesn't just hurt, it humiliates your nervous system. It makes you feel replaceable. It makes you question your instincts. It makes you replay the past like there's a missing clue that would explain how someone could walk away so cleanly. So when they come back, your body wants relief more than it wants truth. Your body hears they're back and interprets it as safety. Your heart starts rewriting the past to make room for the fantasy that this time will be different. Your empathy wakes up and says, they're hurting, I can't be cold. Your old role reactivates. Caretaker, fixer, forgiver, the one who makes it okay again. But listen to me carefully. Someone can be hurting and still be unsafe for you. Begging can be real pain and still not include real accountability. Begging can come from loneliness, from ego shock, from fear, from realizing you're not waiting anymore, from discovering you moved on emotionally. Begging can happen because they miss the comfort you provided, the stability you brought, the way you made them feel less alone, the way you soothed them without demanding too much, the way you stayed even when they pulled away. Begging can happen because they lost the benefits, not because they matured into a partner. And this is the part that protects you. The difference between regret and growth is responsibility. Regret says, I miss you, please come back. Growth says, I understand what I did, and I'm willing to change the behavior that hurt you. Regret says, I can't believe I lost you. Growth says, I know why I lost you, and I'm doing the work so it won't happen again. Regret says, I was wrong, I'm sorry, but avoids details. Growth says, here is what I did, here is how it impacted you, and here is the plan for what I will do differently next time. Begging often wants the relationship to restart. Change wants the relationship to rebuild. Those are not the same thing. Restarting is a reset. It erases the pain without addressing the pattern. Rebuilding is a process. It includes discomfort, accountability, and consistency. A person who truly changed will not rush you into closeness to soothe their guilt. They will respect your caution because they understand they created it. This is why you must not let their tears become your contract. Tears are not a plan. Tears are not repair. Tears are a nervous system release. They can be sincere, but sincerity does not equal capacity. Someone can sincerely love you and still sincerely hurt you the same way again, because the pattern lives deeper than their feelings. Avoidant patterns are triggered under pressure, under intimacy, under conflict, under expectation, under the moments when adult relationships require emotional presence instead of emotional escape. So the real question is not, do they feel bad? The real question is, do they have the skills to stay? Because if they come back begging but still cannot do the following, you are not looking at change. You are looking at a cycle trying to restart. Can they communicate before they shut down? Can they tolerate a hard conversation without disappearing? Can they hold your feelings without calling them too much? Can they stay consistent after the emotional reunion high fades? Can they repair instead of reset? Can they accept boundaries without punishing you with distance? This is why begging is not enough. Begging is what happens at the cliff edge when they feel the drop. But change is what happens on an ordinary Tuesday when they're stressed, overwhelmed, triggered, and tempted to go quiet again. Change is what happens when nobody is watching, when they don't feel desperate, when they don't feel like they're losing you, when they simply have to show up because that's who they've decided to become. And here is the trap you must avoid, the constant intimacy trap. Avoidants often return with intense emotion because intensity helps them bypass accountability. Intensity creates a romantic fog. Intensity makes you forget to ask the questions that matter. Intensity pressures you to soften fast. Intensity can even make you feel guilty for being cautious, like your boundaries are cruelty. But your caution is not cruelty. Your caution is the scar tissue of what you survived. So when they come back broken and begging, your power is not in being cold. Your power is in being calm. Calm is what prevents you from getting swept into the emotion of the moment. Calm is what keeps you connected to reality. Calm is what allows you to love yourself at the same time you care about them. And your calm response doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be one grounded truth, said gently. I hear you, and I'm open to talking, But I'm not going back to the old cycle. If we rebuild, it has to be different. And different means consistent communication and real accountability. Watch what happens next. A person who only wants comfort will get irritated by structure. They'll rush you. They'll guilt you. They'll say you're overthinking. They'll try to skip the conversation and jump straight into closeness. They'll want access, not repair. A person who wants growth will respect structure. They will answer hard questions. They will move at the pace trust requires. They will accept that you don't owe them instant softness. They will understand that your boundaries are not punishment, they are the conditions of emotional safety. So yes, they may come back broken. Yes, they may beg. Yes, they may sound sincere. But your job is not to be convinced by emotion. Your job is to be protected by evidence, because the heart can forgive in a second, while trust is built in patterns, and patterns never lie. Stay to the end. Because I'm going to show you why they really return, and the one mistake that pulls you straight back into the same cycle. This keynote matters because it speaks to the exact moment most people lose their power. Not when the avoidant leaves, but when they come back. The return is seductive because it feels like validation. It feels like your pain finally has meaning. It feels like you were right to hope. And that feeling is so intense that it can override logic, override memory, override self-respect. So if you want your viewer to stay until the end, you promise them the one thing they've never had in this dynamic: clarity about the return. Why do avoidants really return? Often, it's not because they suddenly became emotionally secure. It's because something in their nervous system gets activated when your availability disappears. Avoidants regulate through distance, but distance only works when they still believe access exists. As long as they can withdraw and still assume you care, still assume you'll respond, still assume you'll reopen the door, the withdrawal feels safe. But when you detach and stop feeding the pattern, the safety net collapses. And that collapse produces panic. Not always romantic panic, but controlled panic. The kind that says, what if I lost access for real? This is why so many avoidants return right when you stop chasing. Not because they're suddenly ready, but because the dynamic changed. Your silence becomes different than their silence. Their silence is withdrawal. Your silence is finality. Their silence is a tactic for relief. Your silence is a boundary. And boundaries are uncomfortable for avoidants because boundaries remove the gray zone where they can keep you close without being fully present. So they return in a wave of emotion. They miss you. They feel lonely. They feel the emptiness of not having your warmth. They feel the ego wound of realizing you might move on. They feel the shock of you not being predictable. And those feelings can be real. But real feelings do not automatically produce real change. People can feel intensely and still remain the same person when the intensity fades. That's the key. The return often happens at peak discomfort, not at peak maturity. So what is the one mistake that pulls you back into the same cycle? It's treating contact as commitment. It's treating emotion as evidence. It's treating a return as repair. It's hearing, I miss you, and interpreting it as I can hold you now. It's hearing, I'm sorry, and interpreting it as, I'm safe now. It's seeing tears and interpreting them as, I'm different now. That is the mistake, because contact is easy. Commitment is hard. Emotion is temporary. Character is consistent. Most people, when an avoidant returns, do one of two things: they collapse into instant closeness, or they become harsh to protect themselves. Both are understandable. Collapsing happens because your nervous system is relieved. Harshness happens because you're trying to prevent being hurt again. But the healthiest path is neither collapse nor cruelty. It's calm structure. Why? Because structure is what reveals intention. Structure is what the avoidant cannot fake for long. When you offer instant closeness, you remove the need for growth. You soothe their discomfort, which was the reason they returned, and once they're soothed, the urgency fades. The avoidant's nervous system relaxes. The fear of losing you decreases. And then, because the fear decreased, their old pattern returns: distancing, inconsistency, shutting down when intimacy rises again. That's why people feel like they lost them twice. The first loss was the breakup. The second loss is the slow relapse into the same cycle after you took them back too fast. This is why your viewer needs to stay to the end. Because the end is where you give them the protection they never had, a framework for how to respond to a return without resetting the cycle. A return without repair is just a reset. A reset feels good for a week, then it becomes the same relationship. Repair is different. Repair requires ownership. Repair requires empathy. Repair requires a plan. Repair requires consistency after the emotional high fades. Repair means they are willing to feel discomfort for the sake of rebuilding trust. Reset means they want comfort now. So when an avoidant returns, your first job is to slow the pace. Not to punish, but to test reality. Slow pace means you don't jump into daily texting like nothing happened. You don't reopen physical intimacy immediately. You don't hand over full emotional access because they sounded sincere. You let them demonstrate consistency. You watch how they behave when they don't get instant reassurance. Because this is where the truth reveals itself. If they are only returning for comfort, they will resist structure. They will say you're overthinking. They will rush you. They will guilt you. They will want you to just trust them. They will want the relationship benefits without the relationship work. And when you don't give that, they may disappear again, which proves they weren't back for repair. They were back for relief. If they are returning with growth, they will accept structure. They will be patient. They will answer uncomfortable questions. They will not punish your boundaries. They will not demand instant forgiveness. They will understand that trust has to be earned because they were the one who broke it. So here's the promise embedded in this keynote. I will show you why they return, and I will show you the exact mistake that makes you lose yourself again. And that mistake is giving full access to someone who hasn't proven full consistency. The viewer doesn't need more hope. They need a method. Because hope without method keeps you stuck. Method gives you freedom. Method tells you how to stay soft without being foolish, how to stay loving without being available for damage, how to reopen a door only when the person on the other side is finally willing to build something real. And once you understand that, the return stops feeling like a fantasy. It becomes a test. Not a test you create to play games, a test reality creates naturally. Can this person meet adult love, not just emotionally intense love? Because adult love is not begging. Adult love is showing up consistently when the moment is no longer dramatic. At first they leave for relief, but when your energy is no longer available, panic starts, because the safety net they relied on was your availability. This keynote matters because it explains the most confusing paradox in avoidant relationships, why the person who looked fine after leaving can suddenly become emotional when you stop chasing. And it's important because it protects your audience from misreading that panic as proof of love. Sometimes it can be love, but very often it's something more primal, the nervous system reacting to a loss of access. Avoidants often leave at the exact moment intimacy becomes real. Real intimacy requires presence when it's uncomfortable. It requires communication when there's tension. It requires repair after hurt. It requires vulnerability, accountability, and consistency. For an avoidant nervous system, those things can feel like pressure, like being trapped, like losing control, like being exposed. So when they leave, they feel relief. Not because you meant nothing, but because the pressure ended. The relationship stopped asking them to show up in ways they don't feel capable of sustaining. Relief is their immediate regulation, and when you see that relief on their face, it can destroy you. Because you're thinking, if I mattered, they would be devastated. But avoidants don't always experience loss as devastation first. They experience loss as less pressure. Their first feeling is calm, because they escaped the situation that activated their fear. So yes, they can look fine. They can sound confident. They can act cold. That's not proof you were disposable. That's proof their coping is distance. Here's where the key shift happens, the safety net. Many avoidants, whether they admit it or not, rely on the assumption of your continued availability. Even after they leave, they often believe your love is still there. They believe you'll respond if they reach out. They believe you'll be emotionally accessible. They believe you'll soften if they send a breadcrumb. They believe you'll return because you always did. That assumption is comforting. It keeps the loss from becoming final. It allows them to enjoy the relief of distance without having to face the true consequence of losing you. So in their mind, the bond is still alive in the background. That's why they can leave and still not feel the full grief. Because full grief requires finality. And finality is blocked as long as access still exists. Now, what happens when your energy is no longer available? Not just your body, your energy, your attention, your quick replies, your emotional warmth, your willingness to soothe, your predictable forgiveness, your "I'm still here" signals. The moment those signals stop, the background bond collapses. The relationship stops being a floating option and becomes a real loss. And that is when panic starts. This panic can look like brokenness. They suddenly reach out, they sound emotional. They apologize. They say they miss you. They ask if you're okay. They act like they're falling apart, and your heart wants to believe, finally, this is love. But the truth is, panic is not love. Panic is fear. Panic is the nervous system reacting to uncertainty and loss of control. Because when your energy is no longer available, they can't regulate the relationship through distance anymore. They can't pull away and still feel you waiting. They can't go silent and still expect your chase. The lever stops working. And when the lever stops working, their system does what it always does under threat. It tries to restore safety quickly. That's why the return can be intense. Intensity is a shortcut. Intensity can reopen doors without repair. Intensity can make you forget the plan. Intensity can make you collapse into hope. So here's the crucial point your audience must understand. The return is often about restoring access, not restoring health. If the safety net was your availability, then the panic is about losing that net. They miss the comfort you provided. They miss the certainty that you were there. They miss the emotional home you represented. They miss being able to return to warmth without earning it. That doesn't mean they don't miss you as a person, but it does mean the first wave of return is not automatically maturity. It's often desperation to end discomfort. This is why avoidants can leave for relief and return in panic. Relief is created by distance. Panic is created by finality, and finality happens when you stop being available. Now, how do you tell if it's growth or just panic? You look at what happens after they calm down. If it's only panic, they will reach out intensely, then withdraw again once they feel reassured. They will want closeness fast. They will want to skip the hard conversation. They will want the reset. They will resist boundaries. They will avoid plans. They will say, "Let's not talk about the past." They will make you feel like your caution is the problem. They will treat your need for structure as pressure. If it's growth, they will tolerate the pace. They will accept your boundaries. They will stay consistent even when you don't give instant reassurance. They will engage in uncomfortable repair. They will name what they did. They will acknowledge impact. They will talk about what will be different next time they feel overwhelmed. They will show up after the emotional moment, not just during it. So this keynote is a warning and a map. The warning is, don't confuse panic for transformation. The map is, understand that your availability was the safety net, and when you remove it, the avoidant may react strongly, not because they suddenly became secure, but because the old system stopped protecting them. And here is the empowering part for your viewer. This is why detachment works. Not as a manipulation, but as a filter. Detachment removes the safety net that allows avoidance to continue without consequence. It forces reality to surface. It reveals whether they're capable of adult love or only capable of returning when they feel they might lose access. So when panic starts, you don't rush to soothe it. You don't reward it with full access. You stay calm. You slow down. You require structure. Because the moment you give instant comfort, you rebuild the safety net, and once the safety net is back, the old pattern can return. Then they come back with tears, apologies, and the exact words you always wanted. And that's where most people confuse a comeback with a cure. This keynote matters because it speaks to the most dangerous moment in the entire avoidant cycle, not the leaving, the returning. The leaving hurts, but you can survive hurt. What destroys people is false hope. What destroys people is believing the return means the pattern is finally dead, and then waking up weeks later in the same emotional prison. Except now you feel even more foolish because you trusted it again. When an avoidant comes back, it often looks like a movie scene your heart has been replaying for months. They sound softer. They sound regretful. They say the words you begged for when you were drowning in silence. I miss you. I made a mistake. I didn't know what I had. Please don't leave. I can't lose you. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they share childhood pain. Sometimes they admit they're scared. And that vulnerability can hit you like electricity, because you always believed there was a real person inside them who just needed time to feel. So your empathy rises, and your standards drop, because the return triggers a specific nervous system response in you, relief. Relief is powerful. Relief can feel like love. Relief can make you forget the nights you couldn't sleep, the days you questioned your worth, the way you walked on eggshells so you wouldn't trigger distance. Relief says, finally, we're safe. And the body wants safety so badly that it will accept a temporary illusion of it. That's why people confuse comeback with cure. A comeback is an emotional event. A cure is a behavioral transformation. A comeback is what happens when they feel the fear of losing you. A cure is what happens when they build the capacity to keep you even when fear isn't driving them. Here's the truth. Avoidants can be incredibly sincere in the moment of return. They can genuinely feel regret. They can genuinely feel scared. They can genuinely miss you. But sincerity is not the same as stability. Missing you is not the same as being able to hold you. Tears are not the same as emotional responsibility. A person can be honest about their pain and still be unsafe for your heart if they haven't learned how to stay consistent when intimacy rises again. So what exactly is the trap? The trap is instant intimacy. Instant intimacy looks like texting all day again like nothing happened. Instant intimacy looks like deep late night calls that skip the hard conversation. Instant intimacy looks like physical closeness before trust is rebuilt. Instant intimacy looks like forgiving before you see change. Instant intimacy looks like hearing apologies and dropping boundaries out of fear that, being cautious, will push them away. And instant intimacy feels good at first because it soothes both of you. It soothes them because it restores access. It soothes you because it restores hope. But soothing is not solving. Soothing is temporary relief. Solving requires structure. This is why the comeback can be a cure only if the relationship is rebuilt instead of restarted. Restarting is a reset. It erases the pain without addressing the pattern. It lets both of you pretend the breakup was a misunderstanding instead of a system. Restarting says, "We're back, so it's fine." Rebuilding says, "We're talking again. So we need to understand what broke and what will change." Avoidants often prefer restart because restart is comfortable. Restart lets them feel closeness without facing accountability. Restart lets them enjoy the warmth without doing the work. Restart allows the old pattern to return quietly later because nothing was actually repaired. And you, the person who got hurt, often accept restart because you're exhausted, because you don't want conflict, because you don't want to ruin the moment, because you're afraid if you bring up the past, they'll disappear again. So you swallow your questions, you mute your needs, you say it's okay, when it isn't. You act grateful that they came back, as if your worth depends on their return. That's the mistake that recreates the prison, because if you have to hide your needs to keep them, the relationship is already unsafe. So here's the shift that protects you. When they return with tears and apologies, you don't treat it like the finish line. You treat it like the doorway. A doorway is not a home. A doorway is an opportunity to enter differently. Your job is to stay calm and require clarity, not harshly, not bitterly, calmly. You don't punish them for returning. You simply refuse to pretend the past didn't happen. You refuse to rebuild your life on a moment of emotion. You insist on evidence. Evidence looks like this. They can name what they did without minimizing. They can acknowledge impact without getting defensive. They can accept boundaries without punishing you. They can handle your caution without calling it overthinking. They can create a plan for what happens next time they feel overwhelmed. They can be consistent after the reunion high fades. Because the most telling moment is not when they're begging. The most telling moment is 2 weeks later, a month later, when life is normal, when they're stressed, when intimacy requires effort, when reassurance isn't instant. That's when the pattern either returns or breaks. So when they come back and say everything you wanted, your heart will want to melt. That's human. But you don't let your heart drive the car alone. You let your standards sit in the front seat. Standards don't kill love. Standards protect love from becoming self-abandonment. And if they truly want to heal, they will respect the pace of rebuilding. They will understand that your trust is not a switch. They will show up in the boring days, not just the emotional ones. They will prove that their return is not a performance for access, it's a commitment to change. Because a comeback without accountability is not a cure. It's just the cycle restarting with better acting. I'll give you one calm sentence that exposes everything in seconds, whether they're returning for real growth or just returning for comfort. This keynote matters because your audience is not lacking love, they're lacking a filter. They don't need more emotion, more romance, more maybe this time. They need one clean tool that cuts through the fog. Because in avoidant returns, the fog is the danger. The fog is the way hope tricks you into reopening the same wound with a smile. The fog is how you confuse intensity with intimacy and apologies with accountability. When an avoidant returns, they often bring heat, they bring tears, they bring urgency, they bring, "I can't lose you." And that heat can feel like proof. But heat can also be panic. Heat can be ego shock. Heat can be loneliness. Heat can be the fear of losing access. And the reason you get confused is because your nervous system is exhausted. You've been starving for clarity. So when they finally show emotion, you interpret it as transformation. This is why you need a sentence that forces reality. Not a sentence that attacks them. Not a sentence that humiliates them. A sentence that requires responsibility. Because responsibility is where growth lives, and avoidance is where comfort lives. Comfort wants to bypass responsibility. Comfort wants to skip the hard conversation. Comfort wants the reset. Comfort wants you to soften so they can relax. Growth is willing to feel discomfort for the sake of safety. Growth is willing to build a new system. Growth is willing to prove itself when nobody is begging. So here is the calm sentence that exposes everything. What will you do differently next time you feel overwhelmed and want to pull away? That's it, one sentence. But it's a mirror, because an avoidant returning for comfort can talk about feelings all day. They can say, "I miss you." They can say, "I'm sorry." They can say, "I was depressed." They can say, "I had a lot going on." They can even cry. But when you ask what will be different next time, you're not asking for feelings, you're asking for capacity. You're asking for skills. You're asking for a plan. And comfort has no plan, comfort only has desire. Comfort wants you back, but it doesn't want to change the behavior that lost you. A person returning with real growth will answer that question with specifics. They will say how they will communicate early instead of disappearing. They will say how they will ask for space with a time frame instead of vanishing. They will say how they will return to the conversation rather than punishing you with silence. They will say what they're doing to work on triggers, therapy, coaching, books, support, practicing new patterns. They will not make you responsible for managing their emotions. They will not promise perfection, but they will promise structure. A person returning for comfort will dodge that question. They'll say, "Why are you bringing this up?" They'll say, "Can we just move on?" They'll say, "You're overthinking." They'll say, "I can't make promises." They'll say, "I don't know." They'll turn it into a fight. They'll make you feel like your need for safety is the problem. And if they can't answer what will be different, then nothing will be different. That's the truth your audience needs, because your heart wants to believe words. But patterns are the only language that matters in avoidant relationships. This question also exposes something else, their relationship with accountability. Avoidants often fear accountability because accountability feels like being trapped. It feels like being controlled. But accountability is not control. Accountability is care. It's the willingness to protect the person you claim to love. And if someone experiences accountability as a threat, it means they still want the benefits of intimacy without the responsibilities of intimacy. That's why this one sentence works, because it separates two types of return. Return type 1 is fear-driven, I don't want to lose you. Return type 2 is growth-driven, I'm willing to become someone who can keep you. Fear-driven return wants immediate closeness. Growth-driven return respects rebuilding. Fear-driven return tries to rush the pace. Growth-driven return accepts the pace. Fear-driven return wants you to soothe their discomfort. Growth-driven return wants to create safety for both of you. Now your audience might ask, what if they answer with something vague? That's also an answer. Vague is not safe. I'll try is not a plan. I'll be better is not a strategy. A plan is observable. A plan has steps. A plan has behaviors. A plan has repair built into it. Without that, you're just agreeing to hope again. So after the calm sentence, you look for the second layer, their reaction to your boundaries. Because even if they give a good answer, the next test is whether they respect structure. A person who is growing will not punish you for being cautious. They will not guilt you for needing reassurance. They will not act offended that you want clarity. They will understand that trust is earned in repetitions, not declared in speeches. This is where most people break. They ask for one sign, and the avoidant gets irritated, and they panic and soften, because they think their boundaries will push the avoidant away. But if your boundary pushes them away, the boundary didn't destroy love, it exposed capacity. And this is why the one sentence is so powerful. It gives you the ability to stay soft without being fooled. It lets you respond to the return without surrendering your standards. It turns the moment from an emotional flood into a reality check. So the next time an avoidant shows up, broken, don't ask, "Do you miss me?" That's the wrong question. Missing you is easy. Ask the question that proves whether they can hold you. What will you do differently next time you feel overwhelmed and want to pull away? And in the final part, I'll show you how to rebuild safely without losing yourself again. Because the real win isn't them coming back broken, it's you no longer being breakable. This keynote matters because it answers the deepest fear your audience has. What if I let them back in and I end up back in the same pain? That fear is not paranoia. It's wisdom born from experience. When you've loved an avoidant, you've learned that closeness can disappear without warning. You've learned that warmth can turn cold overnight. You've learned that a beautiful reunion can be followed by another silent withdrawal. So rebuilding cannot be based on hope. It must be based on structure. Not structure that controls them, structure that protects you. Rebuilding safely begins with one decision. You do not restart the old relationship. You build a new one. That means you stop acting like the return is a reset button. You stop letting, "I'm sorry," erase the past. You stop letting chemistry rush you into intimacy. You stop letting their fear of losing you become your reason to abandon your standards. If they are back to meet the new you, the version of you who learned. The version of you who doesn't chase silence. The version of you who doesn't negotiate for basic respect. The version of you who doesn't mistake intensity for stability. So how do you rebuild without losing yourself? You rebuild in layers. Layer 1 is pace. You slow everything down. A slow pace is not punishment. A slow pace is how trust is built in real life. You don't jump into all-day texting. You don't jump into late-night emotional bonding that recreates the old addiction. You don't jump into physical closeness as a shortcut to security. You allow the relationship to earn depth again. You let consistency create intimacy. Instead of intimacy being used to demand consistency. Layer 2 is clarity. You stop accepting vague love. You stop accepting, "I miss you," as the foundation. You require clarity about what happened and what changes. If you can't talk about the pattern, you can't heal the pattern. The goal is not to reopen every wound. The goal is to name the cycle so it can't hide. The cycle thrives in unspoken agreements. It thrives in "let's not ruin the mood." It thrives in silence. So you bring it into the light calmly. You ask direct questions, you listen carefully. You don't argue them into accountability, you observe whether accountability exists. Layer 3 is boundaries with consequences. This is where most people fail because they confuse consequences with cruelty. A consequence is not revenge. A consequence is what makes a boundary real. If the boundary has no consequence, it's a request. And avoidant dynamics are full of requests that get ignored. So you choose one or two non-negotiables and you hold them. For example, we don't disappear. If you need space, you say it and you give a time frame. Or, we'll address conflict within 24 to 48 hours. We don't punish each other with silence. Or, if you go cold or vanish, I step back and I don't chase. Those are not threats. Those are self-protection rules. Layer 4 is proof over promises. Avoidance can be very convincing in emotional moments, but emotional moments are not the hardest time for them to show up. The hardest time is after the moment passes. When life is normal, when stress hits, when intimacy deepens, when the relationship requires maintenance. So you watch patterns. You don't build trust from words, you build trust from repetitions. Does their communication stay consistent over weeks, not days? Do they show up when it's inconvenient? Do they repair when there's tension? Do they tolerate your feelings without labeling you as too much? Do they remain present when you're not giving them instant reassurance? Layer 5 is emotional self-control. This is not about becoming cold. This is about staying anchored when your heart gets triggered. Because the avoidant return will trigger old cravings in you, the craving to soothe, the craving to forgive fast, the craving to make it work, the craving to prove you're lovable. So you practice a new skill. You let feelings rise without letting them drive. You can feel love and still hold a boundary. You can miss them and still require structure. You can forgive and still move slowly. You can be kind and still say no. Layer 6 is mutual responsibility. Rebuilding is not you doing the emotional labor while they try. Rebuilding is both people carrying the relationship. So you look for something specific. Are they taking initiative? Are they bringing solutions? Are they willing to get support? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to do the uncomfortable work without you becoming their therapist? Because if the entire rebuild depends on you coaching them into consistency, you're not rebuilding a relationship. You're rebuilding a pattern where you carry everything again. And here's the most important truth. The real win isn't that they came back broken. The real win is that you are no longer breakable in the same way. That means your worth is no longer tied to their attention. Your peace is no longer held hostage by their mood. Your self-esteem is no longer dependent on their consistency. You are no longer a person who collapses when someone goes quiet. You become someone who observes, responds, and protects your heart without panic. So if they come back, you don't ask them to prove love through big emotion. You ask them to prove love through stable behavior. And you give yourself permission to walk away if they can't. Not because you don't care, but because you care about your future more than you care about repeating the past. Because the final outcome you want for your audience is not reunion at any cost. It's safety, it's dignity. It's a relationship that doesn't require them to disappear to feel powerful or require you to chase to feel loved. And when you rebuild like this, one of two things happens. Either they step up into real growth, or they fade when they realize you're no longer available for the old cycle. Either way you win, because you don't lose yourself again.